Alright, fellow skeptics, Lester of the Skeptic Tank once again. Just gonna let you know this finally came in. This is ISOM 2. Been waiting for it patiently. And as far as the Rookbusters is concerned, I believe Jeff is still working on it. He can always correct me if I'm wrong. But it sounds like, based on the last live show they did, that was indeed the case. So there goes nothing. For those who already have it, let me know what you guys think about it. I am anticipating this, and I know 32 Flavors of Nick Weiser had done his review already. It'll be interesting if we come to the same takes. Oh, a bookmark. Very cool, very nifty. Don't know if I'll be packing this with me to my trip to Idaho, where I fly out tomorrow. But because of the timing of my flight, I likely will head to the airport late tonight and then do a pseudo sleepover at the airport and then check. Maybe I can check in well beforehand, maybe not. It doesn't matter. I mean, a lot of the shops and restaurants don't open that. They don't open until like 5 or 6 in the morning anyway. Oh well. Glad to know they still kept up with their quality. You know, the good binding, very thick in the paper material. Nothing flimsy. Not like some of the comics that I've read coming from the 80s. Pages were kind of flimsy. Although I got a good kick out of all the old school advertisements, like I think it was Clearasil was one. It was the one with the pads to get rid of your pimples. The various Nintendo games. Very cool. Got to echo the Rippaverse ethic. This comic book company was not created at random. I've been rooted in the culture of American comic books since I was a youngster, and being a creative in the industry was always a dream of mine. But the unfortunate state of the industry gave me the push that I needed to give it a shot at such a young age. We've seen what works, and we've certainly seen what not to do. Riververse Comics is the product of a comic book guy that still believes the magic of the culture. With that being said, we are guided by a set of principles that remain the staple of this company. Respect the customer, canon and continuity. I will touch on that in a moment. A comprehensive timeline. I will take a look at the last two. Our aspirations extend far beyond having a couple of characters or series. A vast universe that is ever expanding is what we hope to accomplish. This is something that has long been intriguing about modern American comic books, but it has become a lost art. The Rippaverse will fill this void. This means that every single book you buy will always matter. If retcons are to exist, they will only be used in the classic sense of introducing new information. We want every book that you buy to always matter. Those stories happened. There will be no lazy time travel to change histories or events. There will be no cheap multiverses that have altered versions of the same character. If you own a book, you own a part of the history, and it's our mission to keep it this way. This concept will remain true regardless of the medium. Should the characters appear in officialized animation or live action, the depictions need to be as accurate to the characters as realistically as possible. Your favorite characters will always be recognizable. Because we value canon, this is comprehensive timeline, we value canon and continuity. It's important that you're able to follow the timeline as these characters grow. This will especially be helpful for those of you that become customers years after our founding. We promise to try to keep reboots to a minimum. If this means that a series is on its 100th issue or volume, so be it. But this isn't a reason to feel overwhelmed. There will be plenty of opportunities to purchase anthologies that combine key stories, but we also don't want to hold your hands, as picking up the pieces is often part of the fun. Not every story will be told in chronological order, so we'll always make it as easy as possible to keep up as the universe grows. Very cool. So, I was doing some research of my own. Not deep research, but I'm going to get my dictionary real quick. And as my last video, I talked about the importance of owning physical media. I would say dictionaries included. I just find it interesting how more easily words become adopted or officialized via publications like dictionaries. I'm going to quote the definition of canon in respect to the applicable definitions outside of the context of ecclesiology or church. I may quote some of that if I find it relevant. So I'm going to go with number 3, a body of rules, principles, or standards accepted as axiomatic and universally binding, especially in the field of study or art. A principle, rule, or standard. The canons of good behavior. Any officially recognized set of sacred books. Any comprehensive list of books within a field. The works of an author that have been accepted as authentic. I'm going to see if 11, consistent note for note imitation of one melodic line by another, in which the second line starts after the first. And it shows a bit of the etymology, going from Middle English, Old English to Latin and Greek. Canon meaning measuring rod. Rule akin to kana or cane. Interesting. So now there has been a lot of discussion about Star Wars, what's canon, how liberty has been taken over the decades, whether intended or not. I'm not going to go that deep. I will read something, and this comes from, I'll be upfront, this comes from a scholastically churchy text, but I hope it bears in mind, especially with how, from the people I follow on YouTube, etc., there have been many statements made by George Lucas throughout time and history, and I won't go back to repeat those, but I can probably give you some ideas. WDEW Pro is one channel. He does have a guy named Lauren Connors, I think that's his name, Lauren Connors, and he's a Star Wars buff, but he does acknowledge that there have been things over time that George Lucas has said about certain aspects of the lore. Basically, to start, Force, the Force, how is that worked out in the lore? He's introduced different things. Now, this is in the mind of one man. Now, since Disney has taken over, it's no longer his baby, or at least, he said that it's his baby, but he pretty much sold it to Disney. So Disney is doing a lot of what Rippaverse calls as, I believe, retconning. So without further ado, you might have seen the title with me flashing it around. This is a book that I believe came back into print. I had an older version of it in my parish library. So I'm going to go into that real quick. Number 1, the meaning of tradition, and you'll likely hear the key word. The apostolic Kerygma proclaimed to the world a historic event which happened under Pontius Pilate at a determined date and in a definite setting. This unique event was, on the one hand, the fulfillment of the whole history of the Old Testament. Jesus Christ is he of whom it was spoken in the law and the prophets. On the other hand, it was the unique origin of universal salvation for the succeeding generations. The essential meaning of the New Testament supposes that Christ's redemptive act has been completed once and for all, that nothing can be added to it, and there is no other way of benefiting from it but by hearing the word of God proclaimed by the witnesses. The church is called apostolic by reference to these witnesses, and this adjective is even used in the creed in order to make plane that link with Christ's immediate disciples. These fundamental principles must necessarily determine our attitude towards Scripture and tradition. Okay, I think that will be as far as I will go in terms of the church speak, unless I find other points later on. So what I'm going to do is lay out this notion of Kerygma. And I think in a vacuum with respect to Star Wars, and given Lucas was alive at the time and he would think on these things, especially post original trilogy, now that we call it that, since we now have the sequel trilogy. So I will just say before I read off the definition, if there is one in my dictionary, that Kerygma may be the missing link to really solidify the notion of what's canonical. How do you determine that? Without going too far into churchy speak, the Kerygma is the central, the core, that kind of binds a lot of the articulations one would find over history, as far as explaining the phenomenon of the Kerygma, elaborating on it. What does that mean for the person of Christ? Why he came to this world? That's what the church was wrestling with. But they agreed that there was an apostolic Kerygma handing down. So let's see if I can find that. I believe I'm right in the KER. Let's see. Yeah, okay, there we go. Kerygma. The preaching, well, let's see. The preaching of the gospel of Christ, especially in the manner of the early church, it comes from Greek proclamation or preaching. To proclaim, herald, kerygmatic. Oh, okay. So, I didn't want to throw too many churchy definitions, but I think what might be the missing ingredient is that we, as Star Wars fans, we might have an idea what the quote gospel is as it pertains to the original trilogy. Now, you might have to go back to the various media offered during that time. So if you got like the special edition of Star Wars, there might be some commentaries. That would be part of that overall tradition. And our inspection of that can it lead us to a Kerygma we can deduce. That way we can clearly see what the criteria has to be and whether or not these elaborations beyond the original trilogy, whether we're talking prequels or the sequels, the before and the after, what would be the focal point and what would be the criteria about whether or not certain things are canon. So it's no fault of George Lucas's, but that's just what happens when, I don't want to come off as negative, but that's what happens when the creator is still around. He can still think and ruminate on these things. And yes, there is that phenomenon of development of what you would call development of doctrine as applied by a lot of Roman Catholics, for example. When it comes to explaining certain phenomenon within history as it relates to Christ and other figures around him, like the apostles and the Virgin Mary. Okay, end of religious talk. But just thought I'd give some food for thought as far as that whole concept. And the other thing, too, is that you may hear certain terms that have been used in a lot of churchy contexts. I also want to give the perspective, these aren't exclusive to the churchy topics. Yes, the churchy topics have dominated the use of these words, so the association is naturally attached to them more quickly than, say, if I use the word Catholic. In terms of that, it simply means either universal, and even that gets misconstrued, but the other meaning is complete to the whole and nothing lacking. So what that means is in the context of Star Wars, for example, we have to have a complete view of the overall tradition, or what one might call the scope of revelation to us as viewers, and what would help us make sense of all that. So, to no fault of George Lucas, as that's how I'm seeing it, I know there might be people who could say that he's at fault, and I don't blame him. He should have kind of put a stronger stance. Okay, what is canon? What is the Kerygma that is Star Wars? Because he's the one with the vision. And yeah, it's fine to pull different sources of revelation, but he made it his own. So I think that will do it for now. Just try to see if I can issue a quick video, but it looks like my lunch break is over. All right, guys, until next video, take it easy.